Hi girls, we are studying the urinary system, also called the renal system. This slide shows you what happens if cells are not in their correct concentration. So here are red blood cells with their correct shape, kind of that odd donut-like shape. In the correct concentration, you see that they're happy. Here are cells that are in far too dilute an environment, and as a result, far too concentrated an environment, and as a result, they shrivel up. The image is kind of odd, and these are cells instead that are in too dilute an environment, and they get filled with water and can even burst. And the point of this slide is just to remind you that the concentration of body fluids and of blood is extremely delicate and extremely important. Our body has to be at the just precisely right concentration. Um, and there is an organ and an organ system responsible for that, for maintaining concentration, and it's the kidney. So we have two kidneys. You're probably familiar with the fact that they're on the back of your abdominal wall. People who have kidney pain feel it somewhat like back pain. So we have two kidneys. Then we have tubes that when the kidneys remove the excess and the waste, the fluid, which is more or less urine, flows down through these tubes called ureters, and then there's the urinary bladder, and then there's the urethra, basically the tube through which urine exits the body. So that's all there is. Kidneys, ureters, they kind of have alternate pronunciations, urinary bladder, and urethra. This is a view inside the kidney. This is the urine that will form and that's entering the ureter there. Okay, to be more specific about what the kidneys remove. So the summary is that they filter blood in order to maintain correct concentration. Okay, they're keeping the correct concentration of your body by removing excess. So the first two things is they remove excess water and they remove excess ions, also called electrolytes. So whatever is in excess, they remove so that the concentration can stay just right. Ions or electrolytes are things like Na+, K+, Cl-, chlorine ions, potassium ions, bicarbonate ions, also calcium ions, and so on. They also remove one specific waste. Oh, the next slide states what that is. And the whole thing, the excess and the waste, are excreted as urine. There's a few toxins they remove, but not many. This is just parenthetical. They also maintain proper pH, but we're not going to talk about that. So you don't have to know that. Parenthetical remark. Okay, when we metabolize proteins take a little bit more work for us to metabolize. When we break them down, there's a byproduct which is produced, which is not useful. In fact, if it builds up, it will be harmful, kind of like CO2. Like when we undergo cellular respiration, we produce CO2, and our body gets rid of it. We exhale it. Well, the byproduct of protein breakdown is called urea, and it obviously is excreted in urine. So that's point number 3. We get rid of the metabolism breakdown waste product, and we get rid of excess to maintain concentration. All right. Oh, this is a point about blood entering and passing through the kidneys. So here you see the major blood vessels. This is the blood being fed into the kidney, and then it goes out through the blue vein, the renal artery, and the renal vein. And if you look at the quantities, it's impressive. The kidneys filter 150 liters of blood a day. So think about soda bottles to get a sense of liters. You know, there's the 1 liter and the 2 liter soda bottles. Filter 150 liters of blood a day. It's a lot of blood going through these tiny little kidneys. 1.5 liters of urine are produced a day. The kidneys receive 20 to 25% of cardiac output. That's a lot. Of the blood that your heart is pumping, they receive between a fifth and a fourth, although they're very tiny. And the blood that goes through the kidneys is pretty high pressure. So more statistics. This is the amount of blood you have in your body right now. All the blood coursing through your blood vessels and in your heart amounts to 7 to 8 liters. And the kidney filters much more than that. So about every hour, your kidneys filter all your blood. So your blood is constantly being cleaned and kept at the perfect concentration. So if we get a close up on the kidneys, we see these funny little yellowish white tubules that are called nephrons. So the kidney is just not one massive filtering thing. The kidney is instead a million tiny filtering units, which each one is called a nephron. Okay, I know it's confusing, you don't understand them yet. This is just to give you a visual image. One curved tubule is one nephron. So it's got a little ball and one curved tubule. So here's another nephron over here. All right, what does the nephron do? So a nephron is a complex intertwining of tiny tubules intertwined with tiny, tiny blood vessels, in other words, capillaries, and fluids and salts. Salts is another word for ions or electrolytes, dissolved salts. Fluids and salts can diffuse through these easily because they're thin little tubes. Then the tubule, when it's collected all the bad stuff, when it got rid of all the bad stuff, the tubule flows into this, which is called a collecting duct. It's basically collecting urine or waste, the stuff that your body's gonna get rid of, that's gonna excrete. And this will flow into the ureters. We'll go back to this image. Oops. Okay, this is a reminder of what we learned in the lymphatic system. It's very important right now to remember this again. Here's the artery bringing blood, and when the blood has to be distributed more finely to the cells, it enters a capillary bed, right? The tiniest blood vessels. Remember that these capillaries are so small, you can't see them with your eye. They're very tiny. When the blood enters, it enters with a certain force of blood pressure, right? And that force of blood pressure pushes some of the fluid, some of the liquid part of blood out of the blood vessel. Do you remember that? That's called filtration. It's actually called capillary filtration. So some of the liquid part of blood, it's actually called plasma, the liquid part of blood, gets pushed out of these blood vessels and flows into the surrounding tissue, becomes interstitial fluid, right? It ends up being about 15% of the blood that does that. Okay, why is this important? Because the very beginning of a nephron, here's our long nephron curving around. This is the very beginning of a nephron. If we do zoom in on it, here it is. It turned blue for some reason in this diagram, but it's the same thing. It's a tangled little capillary bed, very small, inside this capsule. Okay, this tangle of capillary bed gets very high pressure blood. And so what happens to the blood? Just as in this image, lots of the fluid portion of the blood is pushed out. And it's called filtrate. The stuff that gets pushed out is called filtrate. And it gets pushed into this little surrounding capsule, this little circle here, this little spherical shaped thing here. And this receives it and it enters into this tubule called the nephron. And from here, what will happen is there's a careful choosing of what will remain in the tubule and be excreted and what will go back into the blood because your body wants it and needs it. So your body is going through this tubule the whole time sorting. I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to keep this. So maybe it needs to get rid of sodium ions and it leaves them in the tubule. Maybe it doesn't have enough potassium ions, so they re-enter into the blood vessel, into the capillary, and so on. So it's this careful sorting. Did I miss anything? I think that's all. Okay, this is a schematic diagram of a nephron. So here the nephron, instead of being long and intertwining, has just become one short straight piece just for the sake of the diagram, just to make it easy. So here's the glomerulus. What happens to the glomerulus? There is filtration, right? Fluid exits the blood, enters the nephron. Then when your body, as it's going along, really we know it's going along a long twisty path, but it's shown in a simple way here. What happens when there are good things that your body needs? It said, oh wait, I needed more of that bicarbonate ion, or I gave you too much water, I need more water back. They re-enter the capillaries. And instead your body decides, but this is what is truly excess, and it actually secretes and excretes it. So the 3 steps, here they have it in 4 steps, but I kind of combined 3 and 4 because they're about the same. So the steps are filtration, 1, which is fluid leaves the blood. Reabsorption, 2, your capillary takes back the things that are good that it wants to keep. 3 and 4, excretion, the things that your body indeed doesn't need, which is either excess or waste, is put in the nephron, and exits as urine. That's the same thing. Just go ahead and see if you can label all the parts and understand all the parts. These additional are just, this is unfiltered blood arriving. In a way, you can call it dirty blood, dirty in quotes. And then when it's gone through all this process, right, of filtration, reabsorption, excretion, what's left is filtered, clean blood. It's blue blood because it ran out of oxygen, but it still is indeed filtered, or so to speak, in quotes, clean blood. Okay, here we unfolded the nephron, and it became a long, thin tube, just to show there's this constant back and forth interaction between the nephron and the capillary, saying, I need this, I want this, no, I want this back. This is what I want you to get rid of. This is what I want to maintain in the body, until it's sorted it all out. And here the urine has remained, and what's good is returning in the blood. Same exact picture, except now in more detail. You can see which ions are being sorted out at which points, right? Magnesium ions, calcium ions, and so on. So that's just kind of a close-up of that. Don't worry about this. Don't worry about this. This is the close-up that we looked at before. Here we go. People who do not have functional kidneys have to undergo what is called dialysis. And it literally means their blood vessels are hooked up to a machine. The blood enters the machine. This is like an external kidney. This is your kidney in the form of a machine. The kidney filters out, this dialysis machine filters out what's bad, takes away the waste and the excess, retains what's good, and puts your blood back in your body. So here's this guy, his kidneys are not functional, his blood is exiting his body, not all at once, obviously, he can't lose all his blood, it's a long, slow process, he has to be hooked up for multiple hours, I don't know exactly how long, and the blood enters this system, it gets sorted out, the machine retains what's bad, what's in excess or what's a waste, and his filtered blood re-enters his body. And he has to stay hooked up to this for multiple hours, and he has to do it multiple times a week, because otherwise he will gain impurities in his blood, and his blood will be unhealthy. So this is dialysis. This is what happens when a person has kidney failure, and they need to do this until they can get a donor get a new kidney from someone. Okay. Minerals or ions dissolved in water, which in anatomy we call them electrolytes, but ions dissolved in waters, when they come out of the solution, they crystallize and they leave behind a deposit. It's the nice thing that happens when you're a kid and you make salt crystals or sugar crystals or rock candy, but it's not so nice when it happens in water, right? It leaves, these are different, these are darker because they're different types of ions. There's different types of ions that can be in our water, but they leave this yucky stuff, okay? This is just to say that you visually have an experience of something coming out of solution. The harder the water is, the more this happens. You might have heard the difference between hard water versus soft water. It's related to that. Okay, so it's the same is true for our kidneys, strangely enough. The more concentrated the ions are in our kidneys, the more likely that those ions will come out of solution and crystallize and form little stones or little sand. Really, it starts with kind of sand crystallizations. They can form in the kidneys. In this picture, they're kind of excessively large. They're usually not that large. And then eventually, those stones, your kidney will push them into the ureters, and you will need to literally urinate them, pee them out. You can see there are a lot of different sizes. Those are on the large size. Many of them are small. Some of them really look like crystalline structures. They're very odd. And so there's several things that can cause kidney stones, but the most common is not drinking enough, because the more concentrated the ions are, the more likely they are to form. And the only solution is to pee them out, which is supposed to be extremely, extremely, extremely painful, because they have to pass through your ureters and then your urethra. But actually the ureters are the place which is very intense pain. Okay, the urethra and the ureters have both the lining that we're pretty familiar with, smooth muscle and mucous membranes. Mucous membranes for protection, smooth muscle. This is an actual photograph. It's got a very bumpy, ridged edge. It's kind of odd. And last thing is that urination, wanted you to think about it. Is it voluntary or involuntary? And in a way, it's a little bit of both, right? You can be asleep and be holding in urine, but you can decide when you want to urinate. Kind of a weird question.